my life really started to change when I went to university in the mid-60s. I'd been a really good student up to then, and I was A grades at university, but I got really disillusioned in the process. Everybody seemed to be phonies, and it all felt hypocritical. So when I heard about CUSO, which at the time it stood for Canadian University Students Overseas, and where if I had a degree I could go teach, in the third world somewhere. So I jumped all over that because it was a way out of Canada, which I felt really stifled by then, and also gave me a direction and something that was really important. So I signed up and I went to Africa for 2 years, 1968 to 70, and I taught 40 to 50 kids in a class, all high school grades, and I taught all science and math. Very challenging, but I loved it. Eventually I loved it, and I just felt like I had grown up. So after that was over, I traveled for a couple more years through West Africa and Europe. I was with a British volunteer. We were teaching in the same village, so the second year we were there, we hooked up and became travel companions for a couple of years. And we hitchhiked all over Europe, and then went in a Volkswagen van with some hippy-dippy American couple from Athens to New Delhi. And we went through Turkey and Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, all those troubled areas, traveled all through there. And then in New Delhi we split up because he was okay. He was a Vietnam vet, but she was really into the hippie image, and we weren't hippie enough, so that had been a big problem, so we said goodbye to them. And then we took trains all over India and went up to Nepal, spent 3 months traveling all over there and living on shoestring, and then another couple months through Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia to Bali. And we separated. In Bali we split. She went back to England and I went on to Australia with $50 in my pocket. So, and so I ended up going to Darwin and landed with $50, but because I was white, it was okay then, the whites only policy in the 70s. And I ended up getting a teaching job, which I didn't want, but it was all that was available. Teaching, and so I taught 6 months on a reservation, Aboriginal kids, and made enough money to hitchhike down to Sydney, and I flew to England, but by then my ex-lover had found another lover, so I was really quite bummed out about the whole process, and it had been over 3.5 years since I got home. I didn't want to go home miserable, so I signed up to go to Israel for 2 months on kibbutz, and spent Christmas of 1971 and went to Bethlehem for Christmas Eve, froze our buns off, but worked on a kibbutz and had a great time. Traveled around Israel, and then flew back to England and came home, and I think I'd left in September of '68 and I got home in February of '72, so 3.5 years. What a shock. Coming home was way more of a shock because we're so wealthy here, and I had spent so much time in poor countries. I was quite arrogant then, thought I knew what life was all about, and I had experienced the real world, and my friends, they were just living in this artificial environment. Anyhow, I went back to school and got my master's degree in social work, got a job right away at the local psychiatric hospital, and I had a great time. I was sort of in the pink of my life. I felt I'd finally matured. Women were attracted to me. I was living the good life of my roommate and I. We got through our master's degrees by, our rallying cry was 10-7. So I'd say 10-7 Tim, and he'd say 10-7 Wayne. And that was the starting salary of an MSW in the mid-70s. So I was earning 10-7, and I was meeting women and hiking and biking and all these great things. So I did that for a year and a half, and I met a nurse, Helen, there. We quit our jobs in the winter of, what, 76, and we hitchhiked down to Mexico and Guatemala and spent 3 months there. And again, I loved that. We both loved it. And then we came back here and started looking for land, for the Back to the Land, it was called at the time. There were all kinds of young adults like myself who were professionals, but we didn't particularly care for the society and its affluence, over-affluence, so a bunch of us were moving out to the country to rediscover our rural roots. So we found 50 acres north of Kingston, halfway between Delta and Athens, a little place called Soperton, where both the enter and exit signs run the same post. And I built a stack wall house, it's called. Cordwood's another word. And it was using lengths of wood that I would cut up like firewood and then mortared in between the logs. And I tore down an old barn on the property, so I used recycled materials as much as I could. And I built an 8 by 12 bathroom. It was a shed. It was going to be the bathroom. It was the first thing that I built, but I ever built with my hands, and that was just marvelous. Actually do something that was mentally challenging and physically demanding, and the end was this lovely shack. Well, it turned out, this is in 1976, Helen couldn't get nursing jobs at the time in this area. They weren't hiring, so she had to go to Toronto. And I picked up a social work job at Brockville, and I lived in that shack for a year, commuting on my job, just had a little wood stove and a Aladdin lamp. And at night I'd read Carlos Castaneda, and Mother Earth News and Harold Smith, and that's how I found 2 articles on how to build this cordwood house, and that's what I used to build the house. So that occupied me for about 3 summers, and I got the house finished. But in the meantime, my relationship was collapsing, and I was not even really, I was aware of it, but I was not able to deal with what was going on. So I just basically worked really hard. And Helen came back after a year in Toronto. And we lived in the same house, but the house went up and the relationship went down. So I went out to Alaska in the summer of '79 when the house had reached a certain major stage of completion, and I just kind of left, without consulting Helen or telling her any of that. And I still feel badly about it, poorly about it. And a friend of mine who I'd met in the area here had this old Rambler, American Motors station wagon, so we drove that from Kingston out to Seattle. And I told Helen I'd be back some point, I didn't know when. Just kind of left her.
Put your heart in every day. Well, they say you learn a lesson every day.